Balance problems in the Naruto anime. Before I tell you what I think about distribution of power in Naruto, there are a few things that should definitely be discussed separately. This is a kind of preparatory part that serves to remove some of the questions and not overload the final video with information. The first question is about balance problems in the Naruto anime. The balance of power and the question of who is the strongest are very complicated things. On the one hand, we have the result of canon battles, where there is a winner and loser in most cases. But in this battle, someone got cheated, someone fought not at full strength, someone lost on purpose, and so on. On the other hand, there are character ability parameters in the official data books, but such tables only cover the events before it touches death. And on the whole, it's just a bunch of dry numbers and nothing more. Of course, you can imagine that there is a person who can compare absolutely all the characters with each other, matching all their characteristics, techniques, strengths, weaknesses, results of canon battles, and etc. And then he can create some kind of objective strength ratio. But that's absolutely beyond our reality, if you ask me. For the most part, the vision of balance is still subjective, not even close to being objective, especially when it comes to forming different levels of power, especially when we deal with controversial characters. And in fact, these characters are the main source of problems. Some do not fit well in the final picture presented by the author, while others, on the contrary, have abilities that are usually considered unbalanced. These are the categories we are now going to talk about. I hope it's obvious to everyone that this anime didn't start with battles between demigods, but with much more down-to-earth battles. And as a consequence, the characters' abilities at the beginning were quite ordinary. While some of the characters were not affected by this, others were shown at the beginning and were able to become stronger later in the story. Likewise, there are those who have been positioned incredibly strong, but they do not fit in any way in the final top list. This can be seen most clearly in the example of Sarutobi Hiruzen, the third Hokage who carries the title of Shinobi God. He is the strongest Hokage of his time. But what did we end up seeing? A shabby old man who, even given a second chance, failed to show a level of strength worthy of such a title. However, this is only at the first glance. In the fight with Orochimaru, he was old and weak, which his apprentice emphasized. What he showed in the battle is the conventional peak strength in Naruto world at that time, but it was not his peak strength. In Edo Tensei, on the other hand, he showed something really outstanding. He used all 5 elements. And he wasn't even gifted with Hagoromo chakra or his sons, and didn't absorb hearts as in the case of Kakuzu. And it is indeed a remarkable achievement for a shinobi, but it looked more like an attempt to justify his power. Like, look, this is actually a shinobi god with all 5 basic elements. It is possible and even necessary to talk about Hiruzen's strength in more detail, since even in that fight with Orochimaru, many people miss significant details due to which Hiruzen looks like a very strong hero. We return to the question of whether or not Hiruzen was shown as a real shinobi god, who was stronger than many of his contemporaries, including 3 Raikage and Kazekage, who had the title of the strongest rulers of their villages, and when by that time there were already 5 Kazekage and 4 Raikage. The story of the third Raikage, A, standing up against 10,000 shinobi comes to my mind. Next, let's look at Hiruzen for obvious reasons, not taking into account his level of strength during the fight with Orochimaru. As I said, since the very concept of strength has gone into an entirely different level. Next, we're looking at the Edo Tensei version. And it's a normal Edo Tensei, not like the resurrection of Hashirama and Tobirama. So, what do we have? In addition to the technique of 5 elements, we see that Hiruzen creates Shadow Shuriken. And yes, they are huge, but somehow can be compared with the monstrous third Raikage A. Then, what is to be done in such cases? Judge by the fact that we saw or trust the author's words. In my opinion, Hiruzen should not be discounted, especially in situations that show him not as a god shinobi. Then Sasori is also not a very strong opponent since he lost to Sakura and Chiyo, although there are some nuances here. Or let's talk about Shin, who created problems for the strongest shinobi, who is definitely not an ordinary opponent but is no match to Obito or Nagato either. So now he has to be put on the same level as them? Not really. Many characters are just hostages to situations. They win or lose, but only because that's what the story wants, not common sense. In a similar way, the demonstration of their power can be cut or improved. Namely, just the visuals being changed, not the power level. However, since we have a subjective assessment here, we should use our own interpretation and take into account all of the above, and not put Uchiha Shin on the same level as Rinnegan carriers or Otsutsuki in general, just because he could pierce Naruto with katana. What about Hiruzen? You don't have to interpret anything here. He was humiliated, not allowed to prove himself in the Fourth Shinobi World War, but the author himself gave him the title of Shinobi God. And if he was not shown as such, it does not change the fact that he is the one. And there are even more hostages to such situations. There are many I have not mentioned about. Often it's not about the technique, but about who uses it and how. For example, Eternal Tsukuyomi. But I can't call it unbalanced, considering the conditions that have to be met before it can be activated. Or Kamui, a technique that also has difficult conditions. But let's take a look at the way Kakashi used it during his pursuit of the Idara. This jutsu is definitely strong, but you can hardly call it unbalanced. Let's recall what Zetsu said during the battle with Sasuke and Itachi. He said it's not about the eyes at all, but about the shinobi. It is highly relevant here. In many cases, it's not just the nature of the technique that determines its strength, but also the level of mastery of that jutsu. So in case of Kamui, especially in Obito's case, it's not the strength of the technique itself that's striking, but how well he uses it, almost on instinct transferring certain body parts to the Kamui dimension. But in this case, the same explanation can be applied to most of the techniques. Either they are strong because Shinobi uses them wisely, or they require following extremely difficult conditions, which makes them in general extremely powerful but well balanced. But there are a few abilities which still raise questions. They cannot just change the outcome of the battle, but rather break it. These are Izunami, Katoma Tsukami, and the Sword of Totsuka. Genjutsu, for example, affects the flow of chakra circulation, but not through one sense organ, but all at once, creating a complex feeling of a time loop in the brain. It can be imposed in a non-standard way, without eye contact, and the power of submission through this technique is so strong that the victim won't even feel he's in Genjutsu. Or we can talk about Sekigari no Tachi. It is an ethereal weapon with an enchanted blade capable of sealing the target it pierces. And what about conditions? Nothing at all is said about the sword, except that Itachi needed Susanoo to use it. Susanoo requires mastery of the ability in both eyes. And Mangekyo Sharingan is basically an extremely strong dojutsu, which only a few people possessed even before the Uchiha clan was annihilated. The situation is similar with Katoma Tsukami. Remember that without Hashirama's miraculous genes, Genjutsu can be used once every 10 years. As for Izanami, Itachi said this technique is helpful for your allies, not for your enemies. And it's not suitable for combat at all, since it's still possible to get out of this technique. But in fact, any Genjutsu can be broken. Well, if it's not Eternal Tsukuyomi, it's better not to get into it at all. And there's a problem here, since you never know how long it'll pass in the real world before you can get out of it. It took Kabuto long enough to get out. And in a real battle, even a second delay can cost your life, especially if your opponent has a Sharingan. But in the case of Izanagi, it seems to me to be the strongest of the three, even considering the price, blindness of the eye. Izanagi is also close to those examples, but it looks like a more balanced technique. Other techniques that are equal to Izanami require the fusion of the Senju and Uchiha genes. But if the conditions for using the technique are not easy, and there are still certain limits, why then can one or the other technique be called unbalanced? Because they stand out strongly considering the overall level of strength of the character. The same applies to Madara, who even without a meteorite can make a huge impact in a battle with an entire army. While Katoma Tsukami ability is incommensurably stronger than Shisui's powers, who is definitely not weak, but still not to such a degree. In some situations, everything looks adequate. It may be just a powerful ability that is stronger than all the other jutsu of the character. In other cases, one technique or another may come literally out of nowhere. The ability may be shown solely to turn the game, and it may look very questionable. We can talk not about jutsu, but about the character who can defeat another character, who is on a whole other level. But that's a topic for the next video. Now let's summarize. First of all, a number of characters are hostages to situations that do not allow them to demonstrate their power. In some cases, this is due to a change in the global level of power because of the development of the plot. And in other cases, it is dictated solely by the need of the story, making the character a winner or loser. Second, for the most part, powerful techniques look powerful because the shinobi has perfected the control of jutsu to the highest degree, or a technique requires equivalent difficult conditions for its application. Although yes, there are exceptions that stand out very strongly if we look at the overall level of strength of the character. Write your opinion about our videos, and share your thoughts on what problems the Naruto balance system has. Do not forget to subscribe and click on the bell, so you will receive notifications about new videos. See you next time, bye!